Welcome back to Perkins Pipes YTPC. Got the bent prints here, jet black. There's a reason for that. I want to talk about the jet blackness of space today. That's why I've got my NASA hat on, and this is a topic I have been waiting to talk about with you guys. So let's get this guy lit. Let's get to talking. As I said, this is one I have been just dying to talk about with you guys. So excited about this. And you may be saying, well, isn't he a Latin teacher? And what on earth is he so excited about outer space for? Well, let me tell you. 10 years ago, in 2014, I had the opportunity to attend International Space Camp in Huntsville, Alabama, with educators from around the United States and really around the world. And people there asked me the same question. What are you going to get out of this? You're a language teacher, ancient language teacher at that. What could be your interest? Well, it turns out the ancients knew quite a bit about science, yes, and even outer space. So that's what we're going to talk about in this episode. This may even go into 2 episodes. This may be a 2-parter, so get ready for this. I introduced my second-year high school Latin students to the idea of ancient outer space. And that blows their minds. How in the world could the ancients know anything about outer space? Right? We've got telescopes, we've got the Hubble, we've got the new James Webb Space Telescope. How in the world could the ancients have known anything? Well, it turns out they knew quite a lot. And so, what I did, I ended up putting together a book of readings for them. Got a bird going. Ancient Readings in Space, selections from Plato, Aristotle, Cicero, and Lucian. Now, some of these texts are in Greek, and I had to find Latin versions of them. Fortunately, there are Latin versions of them. But for example, here's what they get. Here's a text from Plato's Timaeus. They get the Greek text. Even though they can't really read the Greek, we do a little bit of Greek in second-year Latin, but it lets them see it. Then there's the Latin text, some vocabulary, and then space for them to do their translation. And Plato, 428 to 348 BC. In his dialogue, the Timaeus, he starts talking about, first of all, he talks about the idea that there has to be a creator. Again, this is Plato. He says that there has to be a creator for all the planets and the things that you see. And so that's interesting. And then he goes on to say, talking about this creator, okay? He says, here's the Greek, skisas hexache hepta kuklos nisus. In the Latin, septemque impares orbes fabricatus est. He made 7 unequal rings. What are you talking about there? He's talking about orbits. He's talking about orbits for the visible planets, the visible heavenly bodies. Now, first of all, I find that extraordinary. The idea that the heavenly bodies were in some sort of orbit. Now, admittedly, it was around the sun, or around the moon, around the earth, and we know that that's inaccurate. That doesn't matter. That's what I tell my students. It doesn't matter. The fact is, this was an ingenious idea just to conceive of this. Right? Then we move on to, they read a little bit of that. And then we have Aristotle. Okay? Aristotle's 384 to 322 BC. The teacher of Alexander the Great. And he writes a work called Metaphysics. And in the Metaphysics, he talks about two other philosophers, a fellow named Eudoxus and a fellow named Callippus. And he starts off by describing Eudoxus. Yeah, Eudoxus. He talks about Eudoxus first. And he says, Eudoxus quidem, we'll just read the Latin here. Eudoxus quidem igitur solem et lunam utriusque lationem in tribus posuit esse speris. Quorum primum a planorum astrorum esse, secundum autem, secundum blah, 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 blah. He says, Eudoxus indeed, therefore, put that the sun and moon and bearing of each were in three spheres, of which the first was of the fixed stars, the second, however, following that which is through the middle of the zodiac, and then he goes on from there. And he talks about something called the wandering stars, which was their term for the planets. Now, what I want you to grab a hold of is that here you have guys hundreds of years before Christ who are having the notion that the planets moved in some sort of circular formation, okay, spheres, they called them, in outer space. I think it's pretty extraordinary. He then goes on and talks about Callippus. And he says Callippus kind of did the same thing, but he added some other rings, he added some other spheres to accommodate other planets. And then we get to a guy named Eratosthenes. I'm going to link to a video. It's an old video. It was from the 70s, I think, or early 80s, by Carl Sagan. But he does a nice job talking about Eratosthenes. And Eratosthenes lived from 275 to 194 BC. And Eratosthenes, through just raw mathematical calculation, just pure arithmetic, really, calculated the circumference of the earth. That's right. The ancients knew that the world was round. I often bring this up to my students. The Latin idiom for the earth is orbs terrarum, literally ball of lands or sphere of lands. Yes, the ancients knew that the world was round. Now, they certainly got some things wrong. Like I say, they thought things moved around the earth, but I hardly think that's important. If you don't have the James Webb Space Telescope, how do you know that the world's round? What leads you to the idea that the heavenly bodies are moving in spherical orbits? What leads you to such an idea? Stay with that for a moment. We move now to Cicero. Now, Cicero, a lot of people will think of with Roman government. Cicero was a Roman statesman. He was a senator, consul, philosopher. Lived from 106 to 43 BC. And in one of his works, the De Amicitia, he has a bit on, it's called the Dream of Scipio. And he imagines this dream in which the young man Scipio is taken above the earth and is visiting with his dead father and his dead grandfather, and they look down from the stars upon the earth, and they see that it is round. And again, he goes on and talks about the spheres of the planets. He talks about the orbits of the planets. And he's got one for all the visible planets at the time, those that they knew at the time. Talks about how small the Earth is by comparison. And they talk about this wonderful roadway of stars called the Milky Way. And if all that isn't enough for you, consider that the first science fiction was written in the ancient world. That's right. Lucian of Samosata. Now, Lucian, let me get his dates correct here. Yeah, 125 to 180 AD. Lucian of Samosata writes this work called True History, which is an ironic name, because it's not true at all. But he gets on a ship. The ship starts sailing. It goes out of the ocean up into the sky. He sails to the moon, which turns out to be inhabited. And he gets involved in a war between the people of the moon and the people of the sun over control of what really is the planet Venus. They're calling it the morning star. And there's all kinds of crazy creatures. There's people riding on the backs of giant fleas and fighting with monster asparagus spears and all kinds of crazy stuff. It's absolutely wonderful. It's delightful. It's really true science fiction. 2nd century AD. And it wasn't just space. It was the subatomic world as well. We know that the pre-Socratic philosopher Democritus conceived of the idea of atoms, literally uncuttable particles. That's what atom means. Means not. All right, and tom, like tonsillectomy, right, cutting out your tonsils. An atom is an uncuttable particle. And there was the idea that everything was made up of uncuttable particles. You couldn't go any smaller. And the Roman poet Lucretius came up with it, was an extraordinary idea. Lucretius, in the 1st century BC, wrote a work called De Rerum Natura, on the nature of things. And in part, he, in Latin poetry, goes through and talks about some of Democritus's atomic theory. I want to read you just a couple of lines from it. I actually put this in a book that I wrote to my son, or for my son years ago, a little young adult novel called The Space Between. Here's the little blurb on the back. An ancient manuscript may hold the key to unlocking the secrets of reality itself. When a 19th century scientist tries to use that key, he unleashes a disaster he could never have imagined. His only hope for saving the world is to enter once again the space between. Well, the premise of the book is this scientist gets a hold of Lucretius's manuscript De Rerum Natura, where he talks about atoms, and takes it seriously, and he does some stuff, and it's science fiction a la War of the Worlds, okay? The Time Machine. It's very H.G. Wellsian in style. Well, I wanted to share with you this a little bit from Lucretius himself. This is from Lucretius De Rerum Natura, book 2, lines 217 to 219. Now listen to what this guy said. 1st century BC. Corpora cum deorsum rectum per inane feruntur ponderibus propriis incerto tempore ferme incertisque loci spatio de pellere paulum. Here's my translation. Since it's poetry, translated it into a little bit of rhyming lines. When atoms through the void are borne straight down by their own weights, at random times 'tis found, at random places they do swerve around. Lucretius had the idea that atoms are constantly falling in a rain, right? Straight lines of atoms. Imagine raindrops, no wind, just falling straight down. And he says periodically what happens, and he couldn't give any reason for why this happens, but he says periodically an atom will swerve and connect with another atom. And then those two will swerve and connect with another atom, and so that's how things are made, from dogs to trees to pipes and so forth. I want to relight this guy, and let's talk about this for a minute. What does that say to you? The ancient people had developed reasonably sophisticated theories about atoms, so below what you can see, smaller than what you can see, and the far-flung galactic, the motions of planets, the moon, sun, so forth, stars. There's two things I get out of that, or a couple things, at least, that I get out of that I like to share with my students. One is just be in awe of that. Just be in awe of the fact that people that far removed from our modern technology nevertheless were able to conceive of such things. That's why imagination is so important in science. And I would argue that if we care about the so-called STEM subjects, right, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, if you care about that, then you want your 5-year-old involved in imaginative play. You want your 7-year-old learning to read fiction. Cutting out things from construction paper, glue and paste, all that stuff. That has a role in the STEM subjects because it stimulates the imagination. And you look at what we human beings have come up with just from pure raw imagination. Then the other thing I think is to consider what you can do even without technology. All right, all these are ideas from just right up here, just thinking, all right? Pure thinking. Simple mathematics. Mathematics and imagination. And I guess the third thing I would say, let's not be too proud of ourselves. I think there's a tendency in the modern world to think that ancient people were either utterly stupid or inveterate liars. Too many people don't take seriously what ancient cultures have done and said. Now, they may have been wrong about some stuff. Lucretius was incredibly wrong about some of the stuff he said about atoms. Although brilliant in terms of the idea. He's got this idea for why you and I have the dreams that we do. He says, for example, during the day, and you're looking at a dog, okay, your dog is giving off a ray of dog atoms, and the dog atoms are hitting your eye. When you're asleep, the dog is no longer there, but the stale atoms are still in your brain, which is why you might have a dream about riding your dog like a horse to the ice cream store where a brown bear met you and spoke like a human. Right? Oh, the crazy dreams we have. He says those are just the atoms that are still stuck in your brain from what you saw during the day. Now, that may be incorrect, but I think it's just a brilliant idea. So I think ancient people were not stupid, and I don't think that they were inveterate liars. I think they were really quite creative people. Now, there's more to say about this, which is why I say we're going to be in a second episode with this. So talk to us. What do you think about the ancient world? What do you think about science? What do you think about outer space? What do you think about the subatomic world? Love to hear your thoughts. As Malcolm Guite likes to say, I do these little things in order at last to do nothing. Or as I like to say in Latin, Parva ago ut tandem, nihil agam. Have a wonderful day.